The air always remembers what was once refused a goodbye. Silence claimed the vault when Mara stepped in. Yet the fluorescent lights kept breathing dull electric inhale, brighter exhale, as though lungs of wire had been installed above them. Steel drawers. She let the door seal behind her, rubber meeting metal with the hush of a secret, and for a heartbeat she was a child again, pressing a seashell to her ear, hoping to hear anything but her own blood. Now the hum of compressors answered, steady, judicial, like the pulse of machinery judging her. The key looked harmless in her palm. Nickel. A bitten crook at the end where her son's teeth must have worried it. He had taped it inside an envelope and slid it through her mailbox 3 nights ago. The night rain bruised the magnolia blossoms, and he vanished without a footnote. She ran fingertip over the adhesive scar and smelled faint cologne cedar. Soap, something she could never afford for him when he was small. Guilt rose, cold as old dishwater, but she denied it. Voice. Drawer 447 slid out on greased rails. The sound was soft, apologetic, as though the vault itself knew secrets wound deepest when they pretended not to. Inside waited a smaller box, matte black, no label, no initials. Yet her knees cooled instantly, as if someone had opened a cellar. Door under her life and let out the heat. Mara set the key down so it would not betray the tremor in her fingers, then thumbed the latch. A cheap click echoed around stainless walls and came back deeper, accusing. She thought of teaching Jonas to ride a bike behind St. Adeline's, how every spill bled noise he swallowed so she wouldn't see his fear. That was the first betrayal. She decided, training him to hide pain, because she was already drowning in her own. The lid rose. Lace. A rectangle folded into thirds, yellowed like old teeth, smelling faintly of smoke and lilacs. She recognized the patterned tiny chrysanthemums sewn by her grandmother the summer Mara announced she would marry Daniel. That tablecloth had covered uneasy meals, soaked in arguments about money, about hours Daniel spent working late. Arguments ending only when her silence grew knife-sharp. After the divorce she burned it in the backyard pit, watching petals ghost upward. She had believed the fire final. Her breath shallowed. She unfolded the lace. Dust spiraled away, glittering. A galaxy collapsing. Beneath it rested a single Polaroid. Mara's hand hovered, shame pulling invisible threads through her wrist. She turned it over. Image, her 21, in a motel bathroom, mirror cracked like a spider's web. Lipstick too red, eyes widened not by innocence, but by fear of losing it. She clutched the same lace around her shoulders like a bridal shawl. Though the courthouse vows were already spoken. Daniel must have taken the picture before leaving for cigarettes he never meant to buy. She did not remember the flash, only the silence that followed. Why did Jonas have this? Memory bloomed. 11-year-old Jonas rummaging attic crates, asking why Mommy kept old burned stuff that smelled like winter. She slapped the lid shut. Stop digging. He'd fled downstairs, guilt sliding between them like a pane of ice. She had been protecting him, she thought. Children should inherit only the good. Yet here he was, 19, vanished, returning the forsaken inheritance piece by piece. In the photo's corner. A pen mark. 3/5. A fraction, or a breadcrumb. Mara flipped the box lid inside out. A faint outline of numbers showed where something rectangular had once pressed. She felt suddenly audited by memory, debts tallied in invisible ink. Jonas must be telling her there were more pieces, and he alone owned the map. Another object lurked beneath the Polaroid, a brass lighter. Daniel's initials scratched out, replaced by J.K. Jonas Kent. The lighter flipped open with the easy grin of practiced sin. Fuel sloshed. She smelled napalm in miniature and set it aside before the urge to strike became command. Fire had solved nothing. It had only taught the past to hide better. Fluorescence flickered, and for a heartbeat the vault strobed into darkness. In that blackout, she heard Daniel's last voicemail playing on an answering machine already trashed. "Keep the kids safe," he had slurred, ocean roaring behind his words. He was on the ferry, already leaving shore. She never told Jonas his father drowned 3 days later. She let him choose anger over grief, because anger gave muscle to keep moving. Light steadied. Mara realized her cheeks were wet, not tears, just condensate from air too cold for living stories. Maybe grief could liquefy from nothing, condense on skin like water on glass. She closed her eyes, listened to the compressors, tried to translate their percussion. Forgive, forgive, forgive. Lace pooled in her lap, a fragile lake of bygone promises. She saw fine scorch marks at 2 corners her fire had touched, then retreated, warned this cloth might be needed to rewrap wounds. Now it had returned to name its price. What price? Jonas always watched when she set the table, insisting the fork align with the plate's edge, napkin crease perfect. She thought it diligence. Maybe it was rehearsal. Perhaps each meticulous gesture was his way of mapping the cloth he could not mention, folding order into disorder. Speaking through angles and creases, drawer 447 waited. Its emptiness threatened to swallow her. She pictured Jonas in some motel now, mirror cracked, photographing his own reflection, trying to sort which parts were his and which were leftovers from someone else's war. She pressed 2 fingers to the lace and felt its heartbeat. Cotton remembered every table argument, every apology too small, every silence too loud. She lifted the Polaroid to the lights. Plastic gleamed. Her younger self shimmered behind faint fingerprints. She noticed then, beside her shoulder in the image's margin, half hidden by glare, a child's drawing pinned to the wall, stick figures holding hands beside a crook house. Asterisk. That drawing wasn't there that night. Someone had collaged it later. Jonas' childhood scrawl. The fraction 3/5 was a sequence, 5 images, halfway to his truth. Mara's lungs tightened, not with fear but recognition. Jonas was telling the story she refused to voice. A confession by fragments. And she had arrived at intermission. She refolded the lace not in halves but in quarters, rejecting the old pattern. Cloth whispered, folding upon itself like a sigh. She slid the lighter inside, then the Polaroid, nesting secrets within the one that should have died by flame. The box closed. The latch murmured shut, but the drawer gaped, a mouth wanting more. She rifled her purse receipts, a bus ticket dated tomorrow, a crimson lipstick she'd worn once for courage. She placed the lipstick beside the black box, its cap dented from being clenched in teeth while she cried. A new relic, marker of present tense. The drawer accepted it without comment. Asterisk when she pushed 447 back, the rails groaned, an old door warning a child away. She ignored it, palming the key. She slipped it into her coat lining, where fabric whispered conspiringly. Exit required pressing a button for the guard. She hovered, finger inches away, and in that hover she felt years accumulate. The guard would escort her to daylight where magnolias lay bruised under last night's storm, petals curling inward like tiny fists. She imagined stepping among them, lace in hand, letting wind decide direction. Mara pressed. Footsteps approached, measured, unhurried. The vault hissed as pressure equalized. Before the lock disengaged, she straightened her coat and caught her reflection in the brushed steel, a woman blurred, eyes doubled. Between those mirrored selves she glimpsed a third figure, the young Mara from the Polaroid, mouth open as if mid-confession. She said nothing. The door swung wide. Fluorescence behind her flared one last time, a held breath released. As she stepped into the corridor, a single thread of lace clung to her sleeve, bright as frost against wool, fluttering with every heartbeat she could no longer deny. Money sleeps, but the walls that guard it whisper the names it stole. Mara stood beneath the stitched gaze of 2 security cameras, their red diodes blinking like slow heartbeats, measuring her pulse against the bank's The antechamber was all stainless and restraint, a solitary metal desk, a pair of plastic chairs that squeaked when you sat, and Harriet the clerk, whose tie had grown as tired as 3 o'clock light. Overhead, fluorescent tubes shivered. Each flutter of brightness made the cameras wink. Good girls. Keep confessing. She set Jonas's black deposit box on the desk, palms flat as if quieting a child after a nightmare. The lid remained closed. Its secret breathed against her knuckles. Harriet pushed forward a stack of beige forms. Standard custody release, she said low, as though reading a verdict that might still change. Mara accepted the pen. Cheap ballpoint, but the plastic barrel warmed quickly while the tip stayed ice. She wrote her married name Mara Kent then. In smaller ink, her maiden Mara Hale, because the bank loved parentheses the way undertakers loved silence. Halle, meaning strong. What a polite lie-dotted reason for transfer. She hesitated. Jonas's face surfaced in the desk's polished veneer. 19. Bruised pride under one eye. That night he'd asked whether dead secrets still collected interest. Guilt pooled behind her teeth. She wrote, family consolidation. The words looked dishonest even to the neutral steel. Somewhere inside the vault walls, a compressor coughed awake, the mechanical equivalent of clearing a throat before judgment. The cameras adjusted focus with a faint click. Mara smelled ozone and paper dust. And beneath, the ghost of scorched lace still clinging to her coat. Memory followed scent, the way a tether follows a kite. Paper rattled as Harriet gathered the pages, rattled like dentures in a bedside glass. Teeth, Mara thought, and remembered the day Jonas lost his first incisor, aged 10. Blood bright on his palm, running inside to show her. That same afternoon, she had lifted the old Gardenia dress cream silk, grandmother's pride, toward the sun to examine for moth wounds. Sunlight poured. Thunder answered. Minutes later, lightning speared the backyard sycamore, its shattered limb crushing Jonas's bike. Heaven had offered its editorial. Harriet presented the final page. A faint lemon polish smell rose from the desk, mingling with the older scent of mothballs that still haunted the dress. An olfactory argument between preservation and decay. Signature here releases all contested custodial claims. Once processed, only the named party may access or alter contents. She recited with ritual neutrality. Mara's knuckles whitened around the pen, revealing the thin white scar across her index finger, a souvenir from the day Daniel slammed a window too quickly. If she signed, Jonas's breadcrumb map would belong to her alone. The cameras blinked, red, pause, red, like Morse code from an invisible jury. Guilty. Then guilty again. A flashback wormed through. The motel bathroom mirror, cracked like ice. Daniel's brass lighter clicking flame toward lace just to see how readily Cotton surrendered. He'd laughed, "We keep what we can't burn," before leaving for cigarettes he never planned to buy. That laugh lingered now in the fluorescent. Buzz. Present flooded back. Mara signed. Ink slid smoother than she expected, as if the paper wanted relief from waiting. Shame transformed into silence, and silence perhaps into resolve. Harriet stamped 3 blue ovals of authority. Each thunk vibrated inside Mara's ribs. She slipped a carbon copy into a brown envelope, taped it closed, then offered it. "Notarized," she said. Her gaze wavered, softening. One mother recognizing the fracture lines in another. Mara turned the envelope. Something slender slipped free, a smaller gray envelope, unaddressed, sealed with the bank's notary embossing like a faint bruise. It made no sound landing, yet the room reacted. The cameras tilted, red eyes flaring. "That isn't mine," Harriet whispered. She reached, but Mara covered it first, pulse drumming through her palm. Weight inside metal maybe, or the bones of a key. Another note from Jonas. Mara angled her body so the cameras caught only her shoulder. She eased the flap open, careful not to tear. Inside waited a photograph and a folded cashier's check. She drew the picture, black and white scalloped edges. A young woman, her mother, wearing the Gardenia dress, stood beside a payphone. Storm clouds simmering overhead. At her throat glinted a small brass locket, heart-shaped, shut tight as a fist. Someone Jonas surely had written on the back. She ran. "You stayed." Beneath the photo lay the check, $10,000 to Jonas. Kent, drawn on the dormant estate account of Daniel Kent. Insolvent, Mara knew. She'd balanced its debts herself. Yet the digits glowed angrily legitimate. On the memo line, in handwriting identical to her own, were two impossible words: Storm Fund. The world tilted. Lightning crashed again, in memory sycamore splitting. Bark steaming. Patterns emerged: storms, dresses, disappearances, generational weather. Jonas had seen the map she pretended wasn't there. Harriet spoke, tentative. "Anything else I can do?" Mara met her eyes. "May I borrow your lipstick?" The request startled them both. Harriet dug a coral-colored tube from her purse. Its cap was dented the way kindness often is. Mara applied, color blooming against her fatigue. Lipstick on a cup. She flashed on her mother's coffee ring the night she advised, "Let him think. The thunder is your fault, safer that way." She pressed coral lips to the brown envelope, marking it with a soft wound of color. "Now it's mine," she breathed. Harriet half smiled. The cameras blinked faster, hungry for plot. Mara tucked the gray envelope and the bank copy into her coat. The pen plastic, still warm, followed. Small theft against an institution that rented safety by the hour. A hush collected. Even the Vavik seemed to hold breath while she crossed back to the vault hallway. Her flat sighed over stone, each step remembering the lace, the lighter, the lipstick, 3 petals of a 5-part bloom. 2 petals remained at the security desk. Monitors glowed. On one screen she was haloed by neon glare, coat edges lifting like wet wings. The red camera lights winked again, but she no longer read judgment, only caution. Like lanterns marking the edge of a cliff. Mid-stride she computed a new arithmetic. $10,000 could buy time. Search or restitution. But forgiveness was a door with no handle, opening only when one stopped pushing. She chose defiance, quiet, patient. She felt the scar on her finger throb. Memory's pulse rising like static just before a broadcast. Outside, drizzle stitched silver threads through the revolving door glass. City noise swallowed the vault's hum. Traffic hissed, horns mourned distant impatience. Overhead, thunder rumbled, undecided. She turned the stolen pen between fingers. It smelled faintly of vanilla lotion from Harriet's hands, north toward. The bus stopped. The concrete shone, mirrors to gray sky. Each streetlight cast her shadow, carrying something invisible. At the corner she halted beside a trash can, balanced the notarized parcel atop the rim. Paper was treacherous, always ready to testify. She removed the custody forms, tearing them into strips narrow as raindrops. Authority fluttered downward, mixing with coffee grounds and pamphlets for lost dogs. She kept the lipstick-kissed flap, tucking it beside the photograph, moment of color alive among grayscale remains. Only the gray envelope remained. She waited like a small animal deciding trust. Not here, under municipal cameras. Some truths deserved candlelight. A bus sighed. To a stop, doors yawning open. She boarded, paid, and chose a seat where her reflection merged with passing shop fronts. Mannequins floated by, headless brides unsure which vow to keep. A pawn shop displayed gold teeth that glimmered like laughter stripped of voice. A lawyer's billboard promised justice like a coupon. Somewhere, Jonas rode a similar bus, wondering whether riddles could be solved before they devoured. Mara uncapped the pen and wrote on her palm, 4/5. Ink bled along lifelines in tiny tributaries. She closed her fist. The bus cameras saw only a woman pressing her hand to her heart. Thunder deepened, a dog refusing settlement. Passengers glanced upward, muttered about weather apps. Mara felt the Gardenia silk rustle across decades, issuing both warning and dare. She envisioned the remaining relics, perhaps Daniel's scarred lighter once more, perhaps a splinter of the lightning-shattered sycamore wrapped in foil, perhaps a will Jonas had rewritten in secret naming the unnameable. The bus rolled past. The crematorium where Daniel's ashes never arrived. The sound had kept them like unspent coins. She licked coral color from her lips and tasted salt metal. stormwate dotted her stop. She rose. The gray envelope pressed her ribs with steady heartbeat. She stepped into rain now certain of itself. Every drop a verdict. Umbrellas bloomed like cautious flowers, but she walked bareheaded, letting water rinse residual surveillance from her skin. Night would demand choices. Lawyer, preacher, or runaway son, the equation changed with each mile. For now she followed. The gutter's bright ribbon, trusting it to guide her to the old house's stump. Roots still smelling of lightning. Rain darkened her coat, but one coral kiss clung to the fabric, bright as a wound refusing to clot. Memory is a dress nobody dares return. The door to Jonas's bedroom, side open so quietly it seemed ashamed of its own voice. Mara stepped through the dust stripe that swept across the floorboards, already smaller than the silence she'd carried in. Curtains bleached toward translucence, inhaled and exhaled with the late autumn draft. Each breath stirred motes once made of skin, chalk smudges, and the charred rims of flashcards her son had crammed before finals. The room smelled of cedar sachets long spent and the faint metal tang of uncried tears. She carried the gardenia, gown folded across both forearms, linen gloves protecting her fingers from its chill. In harsh daylight, it still pretended to ivory, but the bedroom's blue twilight revealed smoke-ash undertones, the shade of promises reheated too many times. She eased it over Jonas's empty mattress, smoothing the collapsed bodice, coaxing. The skirt flat the way nurses calm sheets around a patient who will not recover. Asterisk at the bank earlier. Cameras had stared with indifferent red eyes. Here only the stuffed wolf on the dresser watched. One of Jonas's baby relics, fur rubbed thin. One glass eye cloudy. Mara pressed its head, an apology for all the sentences she had spoken around rather than to her child. The wolf fell sideways, exhausted, and the gown reclaimed her. First fold, sleeves tucked inward like hands forced into prayer. Second, silk panels overlapping heart to heart, sealing breath. Third, hem raised to meet collar, a shroud rehearsing. Itself, it felt wrong. Folding was a language. She needed the syntax perfect. So she unfolded everything and began again, slower, letting the fabric teach her where its pleats remembered being, where they had grown stubborn with every stroke. She heard rain that was not falling. It belonged to the night she first wore the dress hotel suite, bought with borrowed cash. Daniel uncorking champagne that stank of tin. Outside, thunder strafed the city like artillery, but she believed the ceiling would hold. Daniel teased, his brass lighter flame flirting with silk, and laughed, promising forever as though the word feared him. Jonas had been conceived before the bottle was empty. A loose thread near the waist slipped free with terrifying ease, unzipping 2 inches of seam before she trapped it between thumbnails. The line between past and present gaped. She wanted to knot it, yet her throat felt tied instead. She let the thread dangle a vein refusing blood and traced lace roses sewn by her grandmother. Every petal browned like tea stains on 2 treasured porcelain. Another gust nudged the curtains. They ballooned, collapsed. The smell of attic cedar and distant electricity slipped in. Every storm echoed the one that split the backyard sycamore, the one that took Daniel to the sound, the one brewing behind Jonas's eyes whenever she hid truth beneath kind-sounding lies. He had left her a cashier's check labeled Storm Fund, because he knew she would need currency to fight weather no forecast mentioned. She sat on the edge of the bed, mattress sighing a memory of adolescent weight. Jonas used to lie here tracing cracks in the ceiling, claiming he saw continents. She saw fault lines. His absence shaped the air. Even dust drifted cautiously, unwilling to settle where he might return. From her coat she drew a photograph of her own mother wearing this dress. A heart-shaped locket blinking like a warning light at her throat. Thunderheads behind her like a held breath. Mara propped the picture against the pillow past-made spectator. She unbuttoned her left glove, exposing the pale scar across her. Index finger, souvenir of the day Daniel slammed a window too fast. The scar tingled now, the body's Morse code for approaching danger. She lifted the skirt, letting it cascade over her forearms. A faint metallic whisper came from the hem, as if coins hid inside. Tilting the fabric toward window light, she saw beads of cut glass she had stitched the night before the wedding, wanting the dress to sound like rain so thunder would feel invited, not intrusive. Several beads had loosened, rolling constellations across the quilt. She corralled them, arranging Orion between faded flowers, then Perseus along a sun-bleached ridge. Flashback arrived as temperature. The bridal suite's thermostat stuck high, sweat pricking beneath layers of tulle. Daniel pressed his cool forehead to hers, whispered, "You smell like a church candle," then turned away to answer a call that never ended. The lighter winked amber between his knuckles, punctuation to her vows. When Hale began tapping the windows, he laughed. Guess the sky objects, and she laughed too. Mistaking volume for agreement. Present slid back into focus. Another thread escaped, dark as rust. Heart hammering, she followed it to the underside of the hem. The fabric there looked darker, stiff. She widened the fold and saw the stain. Blood brown, almost the shade of dried lipstick on a deserted cup. Not wide, but deep, as though the liquid had traveled an intimate path before surrendering. She recoiled, then steadied, fingertips hovering a breath above the blot. Old blood? Wine? No too deliberate, centered like a compass rose. The impact site of a hidden wound. Wind sighed against the glass, and the dress shivered across her lap bride. Waking inside a coffin, the stain pulsed dully. She remembered nicking her thigh shaving that wedding night. A trivial cut that bled through a towel she'd thrown away, convinced it would betray disappointment. Yet here was the evidence preserved in the hem, as though someone had stitched her doubt into the gown itself. Her mother's cursive flickered in memory. Protect the story you need, not the one they want. Had Mother tucked the stained scrap too? Worn that marriage bleeds? Or had Jonas discovered the cloth somewhere only ghosts rummage? She pressed thumb and forefinger around the stain's edge. The fabric crackled, coagulate, resisting daylight. She pictured young Jonas examining scabs, asking whether pain slept while we did. She had answered, "Pain keeps watch." One bead rolled. From Orion, striking hardwood louder than size should allow. Mara jumped. The stuffed wolf toppled to the floor, lone eye catching the last light, quietly accusing. She realized she was murmuring, a prayer without verbs. Shame flickered, then. Defiance rose like a whale seeking air. She retrieved the wolf, set its sentinel over the dress, and stood. From Jonas's desk, she drew scissors orange-handled, blades sticky with old glue. She cut the dangling ivory thread, then snipped around the brown bloom, carving a careful square. The gown trembled in her grip, lighter now. Uncertain of its new silhouette, she opened the bedside drawer, found Jonas's childhood sketchbook, dragons, thunderheads, wolves listening for distant howls. She slipped the stained square between 2 pages where a dragon sheltered an egg. Paper accepted the offering with a hush. Mara exhaled, long and thin, releasing breath hoarded since vows first cracked. The gown on the bed looked smaller, like it had yielded territory to something braver. Still it waited, throatless for her. Verdict: burn, wear, bury. She had not chosen, but tonight the decision had teeth. Dust settled on her shoulders like first snow. Even snow must land somewhere. She fixed on the vacant space where the stain had lived, a pale parallelogram of absence. Outside, thunder murmured again, traveling the power lines toward some unlit distance. She drew the curtains shut, painting the room a deeper bruise. In that half-dark, she could almost see Jonas leaning in the doorway, taller than anger, holding an unlit lighter, asking whether stories finish or only fold smaller and smaller until they fit a pocket. She did not answer. Instead, she lifted the dress, folded it once more, sleeves inward, bodice down, hem to collar, until what remained resembled a letter too dangerous for an address. She placed the parcel in her suitcase, beside the gray envelope and the coral lipstick. Closing the case felt like shutting a casket on weather. Then she switched off the lamp, and the room listened while threads, beads, and dust conspired, whispering the gown's new emptiness like a secret even silence could taste. Some secrets are stitched so close to the skin, they learn the rhythm of the heart they betray. Mara sat on the floorboards because the dress demanded humility. Suitcase open, curtains drawn, only the lamplight's amber halo confessed her presence. She had not meant to unbury the bodice tonight. Storm-flecked window, late hour, throat raw from unslept questions. Yet her fingers kept returning to the gown folded like an unmailed letter beside the gray envelope and the coral lipstick. Stains she'd excised earlier still pulsed in her mind. A phantom wound. She unhooked the tiny pearl buttons down the spine of the Corset 31. She'd counted them on her wedding morning while her mother hummed "Hush, Little Baby," off-key to calm them both. The melody surfaced now, threadbare and lopsided, as though time itself had forgotten a verse. The silk underlining sighed, releasing a pinch of attic musk dot between inner seams. Just below the place her breath had once fought the stays, something crackled. Paper. She parted the lining, a rectangle folded as small as a child's fist, sewn in with frantic knots of black dental floss. Jonas's emergency fix for everything from backpack straps to fishing lures. The room tilted. Her pulse lurched to match the wardrobe mirror's faint tremor, a trick of lamplight, she told herself, but grief already patted back, baring refreshed teeth. She slipped sewing scissors from the suitcase, orange handles glinting like warning lights, and snipped the floss. The paper slid free, featherlight, yet gravity bowed the world around it. Date in the corner. The night Daniel drowned. Mara's lungs cinched tight. Jonas had been 11, the age of impossible bargains. The handwriting spiked and sagged, letters colliding as though chased by thunder. Mom. If the water wins, don't blame the sky. It only echoed. The lighter was in his pocket when he tipped. I tried to yell. Waves ate the sound. I tried to jump. Your rule about storms and docks stopped me. So I watched. And I kept the lighter because fire is the opposite of water. And maybe you would need the other half someday. Ink blotches like raindrops blurred certain words. She traced them anyway, fingertips skimming vowels the way one touches a sleeping fever. He had been there. She had pictured Daniel alone with whiskey and wind, but her son's eyes had witnessed the undoing. And he had never said. A floorboard popped. She startled, expecting Jonas in the doorway, older now, his silence redesigned into armor. Only the stuffed wolf on the dresser regarded her. Its single glass eye distilled disappointment. She read on. Polished the lighter with sand until Dad's initials vanished. People forget shapes faster than fire. I'm hiding it in the box because you burn things you love only when you're scared they might burn you first. If you find this dress again, it means you've stopped being afraid of echoes. Good. I have. 2, mostly, but I remember. The sentence fractured. The next line dipped off the margin as if he'd run out of breath. Beneath, scribbled lighter, almost invisible. Tell the tree sorry. Mara's hand flew to her scar, fingertip riding its ridge. The sycamore limb she had cursed at that tree for crushing Jonas's bike, never thanking it for shielding the house from lightning. Jonas, even young, had understood living things take blows for the guilty. Shame tightened her shoulders. She lowered the paper to her lap, the corset crumpling beside it like a collapsed lung. The lamp hummed electricity, impersonating lullaby. She wanted to stand, pace, do something kinetic to outrun implication. Yet the letter pinned her knees. Flashback bled through, dock lights stuttering. Daniel swaying, whiskey bottle flashing code to the dark. Jonas's small silhouette on shore, sneakers half-tied, shouting, unheard. Mara had been home, mending. The bodice after an argument about money, telling herself sewing was control. She felt the needle still, pricking her memory's fingertip. Silence thickened until the radiator clanged a single bar note, a dull choir bell marking a mass for one. She reread the final fragment, I remember. It was both confession and indictment. All her efforts to shield Jonas from Daniel's drowning had instead handcuffed into it. She had burned stories until only smoke remained, and smoke had found lungs too young to refuse it. Objects crowded her vision. The locket on her mother's throat in the photograph, the gray envelope bulging with impossible money, lipstick kiss. Blooming on bureaucracy, the blood-brown fabric square hidden among dragons. Each item tuned itself to the same frequency. Together they sang that memory never loses court appeals. She searched the corset lining again, fingertips sliding like thieves. Something scratched. A thin metal tag, once the lighter's base surfaced. Daniel's initial D half erased. She set it on her palm. It looked like a miniature shield too dented for war, yet unwilling to be discarded. A gust rattled the window. Latch, lamplight flickered as clouds rewound over the moon. Mara rose, letter trembling like a newborn bird between forefinger and thumb. She crossed to Jonas's desk, every footstep married to the phrase I remember. She opened the top drawer, receipts for textbooks, a folded flyer about legal aid, the sketchbook sheltering the stained fabric square. She slid the letter atop the square confession over blood, then paused. Defiance whispered. Hiding had birthed. This fracture, perhaps exposure, could suture. She placed the metal tag on the square, uncapped the coral lipstick, and drew a small circle around both. Colors seeped into pulp, bright as fresh hurt, but the mark felt like a boundary as much as an invitation. Mara closed the drawer, but left it unlocked. Choice must remain reachable. When she turned, the corset lay where she had knelt, faint hourglass silhouetted on the rug. She lifted it gently, aware it had once sculpted her breath, negotiated her posture, dictated where her ribs could dream. She ran a line of tack stitches where she'd cut, sealing the cavity, no longer a hiding place. The mended silk puckered. Truth seldom resues pretty. She draped the corset over a chair back, bones gleaming through fabric like the cage of a small, forgiven animal. Something in the room shifted. Gravity corrected, as though the confession recalibrated air, yet relief came barbed. Grief returned, yes, but new, with teeth sharpened by certainty. Jonas had carried that night in his pockets for 8 years. What else weighed his steps? She pictured him sitting alone on some motel bed, palms smelling of cedar and seawater, penciling maps of storms he couldn't outrun because she'd walled them into silence. She glanced at the bedside clock, 3:23 a.m. The hour tides change. Their mind. Later today, she would call the number on the legal aid flyer, ask questions whose answers might raise whole landscapes. For now, she let the decision rest beside the lighter tag, still warm from her skin. She turned off the lamp. Darkness settled, testing the room like a stranger tugging at curtains. Through the window, faint docklights quivered miles away, reflections trembling on black water that kept too many voices. She whispered into that dark words, not prayer, not apology, but the raw shape of resolve. The stuffed wolf caught glints from the street lamp. Toothless but vigilant. She lay on the bare mattress, corsetless, heart louder than the march of plumbing. Sleep refused, but she closed her eyes anyway. In the vast cinema behind lids, waves rose, unmuzzled. Jonas stood on shore again, older now, turning toward her. He held the brass lighter aloft, its flame a small, stubborn sun, and in its light she read two unmistakable words spoken without lips, carried by wind back to her spine. I remember. Joy thrown like rice can grow sharp when it dries. The house listened first. Before Mara crossed the threshold of the living room, she felt its hush press against her sternum, a hand from the past reminding her who owned the silence. The afternoon rain had stopped, but water still ticked inside the gutters, a slowed metronome, marking measures of dread. She unlatched her coat, still damp from alley mist, and stooped to untie her shoes, when something white winked beneath the hall lamp. A single rice grain, wedged upright between the carpet's tired threads. She knelt. The grain looked fossilized, as though it had endured a century of footsteps. Yet this carpet had been vacuum-striped only yesterday. She pinched it and felt the brittle snap, memory cracking bone. Rice belonged to weddings, not widows, and certainly not to houses that had forgotten vows. Another grain glittered near the baseboard, then a scattering like sprinkled salt leading deeper. Mara's fingers brushed the amulet locket at her throat, the portrait of infant. Jonas inside rested against her pulse as if curious. The locket had belonged to her mother. Its clasp clicked once, a small impatient sound, as if urging her to poop. Follow the trail. In the kitchen, the pattern thickened. Grains perched on tile grout, each casting a pin shadow in late sun. She imagined tiny bridesmaids frozen mid-throw, arms forever suspended. The refrigerator hummed a flat note, the key of unspoken hunger. Mara's peripheral vision filled with ghosts of slammed doors, plates colliding with drywall. She almost smelled the tang of Daniel's bourbon breath when he declared, "Dinner unnecessary because promises were nourishment enough." A memory unlatched. Quick and bright, Jonas at 5 hiding beneath this very table while voices speared overhead. To cope, he had counted floor tile cracks. "If I get to 100, thunder won't happen," he whispered. Mara, too busy wielding silence against. Daniel had let the child's arithmetic serve as armor. Now she pressed bare palm to one of those cracks and mouthed, 93, 94, but the relief spell had expired. A burst of wind rattled the back door. It stayed shut, yet she heard the undeniable patter of small shoes darting across. Linoleum rubber soles skidding, producing that desperate squeak toddlers make when races begin in imagination. Her breath hitched. Jonas's sneakers, miniature navy ones with the red stripe, had been boxed for Goodwill years ago. Echoes. Then, or a warning, asterisk, she tracked Rice to the threshold of the hallway. Evening light poured horizontal, turning the grains into embers. As she stepped, crunching faintly, she recognized another sound buried beneath, a low, rhythmic thud, like a door breathing against its own frame. Testing promises of locks. Flashback rose uninvited. Wedding reception, rice shower ribboning through. July heat, Daniel scooping her up, grains lodging in her hair, her bodice, her dream of neat beginnings. She laughed then. She could not remember how. Later that night she shook handfuls from the dress onto this carpet, telling herself each piece was luck. The grains must have sunk deep, surviving vacuums, shampoo, entire seasons of forgetting until disturbance lifted them, like conscience. Disturbance. A week ago, she tore a blood-brown square from the gown. Last night she stitched the corset closed. Around absence. Today the house bled rice. Cause and confession. Halfway down the hall, she paused beside the brass umbrella stand that once hid Daniel's broken lighter. It stood empty now except for a rolled newspaper and a single white envelope addressed in no hand at all. She left it, spine prickling. Rice streamed into the study Jonas's childhood den turned temporary evidence room. Dust veiled the desk, though she had wiped it that morning, and on its surface an inscription finger drawn through the powder, "Remember." No punctuation, yet each letter felt edged. Her vision swam. The scar on her index finger flared like a struck match. On the windowsill, in a row, sat objects. The lipstick with the dented cap, the tag from Daniel's lighter, and the coral-painted circle Jonas's letter bled through. Someone Jonas, some earlier self, had arranged them as though setting communion. Behind them the sheer curtain lifted, revealing dusk-forming bruises along the roofs outside. Mara swept a palm across the desk. Rice scattered, drumming hollow. Percussion against hardwood floor. She appended the locket, letting the half-moon portrait of baby Jonas blink to ceiling light. He grinned, toothless, unaware of tides that would claim vocabulary he had not yet learned. She whispered his name like trying out a password. A soft thump echoed from the front parlor, followed by the scrape of wood across threshold metal. Her mind offered no delay, door. Yet she had bolted it a habit since Jonas vanished. Sweat needled behind knees. She muttered, draft, though she tasted the lie. She backtracked along the rice trail. Each step reversed to history. Outside the bathroom, she glimpsed herself in mirror glass. Hair uncombed, coral lipstick reduced to ghostly outline. 4. A blink, the reflection behind hers belonged to 11-year-old Jonas, eyes ocean deep, lips forming a single phrase. She spun. Emptiness inhaled. The parlor carpet bore the heaviest scatter, as though an entire fistful had been released from the foyer and ricocheted outward. Some grains stuck to the leather of Daniel's vacant chair, bright on dark like daylight seeds. She brushed them off and the chair rocked once, then still. The motion conjured Daniel's ritual. He'd lean back, let the lighter click, snap. His belt on the armrest like punctuation. She smelled phantom butane and TENSED dot at the wall. The wedding photo remained tilted from years before. Frame cracked where Daniel's ring had struck it during an argument about Jonas's report card. Rice now lodged in that crack, white teeth in a silent grin. The thud came again. The front door dot, she crossed the final stretch of grains, each crunch climbing her spine. At the door she noted bolt still horizontal, chain latched, yet the wood eased outward, creaking against its hinges in small, unhappy sighs as if someone unseen leaned from the other side, polite but insistent. The gap was thin as a silk thread, but cold autumn air snaked through, stirring her fringe. Mara's throat contracted around words she did not prepare. Fingers touched the bolt. It vibrated gently, not with wind but with contact, like a pulse conducted through brass. She pressed her scarred index to the chain, listening for the hum of another body's resolve. Flashback flickered. Child under table counting. Then a bigger child on dock shouting, voices devoured by larger silence. Each time she had locked the door afterward, thinking bolts and bedtime stories could domesticate fear. Yet fear was grain small, able to fall through stitches, skitter across memory. Wait decades for barefoot truth. Rice crunched behind her. She turned halfway. An invisible path arrowed from parlor to kitchen, a question mark of white fragments. One grain slid now, propelled by no breeze, settling at her heel as if making a point. She faced the door again, unlatched the chain with a delicate lift. The creak grew throatier. She inhaled the chill, scented of wet leaves and river distance. Beyond the crack lay nothing she could see, only dusk thickening into night. The air bruised purple. Her hand hovered over the bolt. She pictured Jonas on the other side, rice slipping from pocket holes, too tired to knock, trusting breadcrumbs to speak. Or perhaps another messenger past self, wearing the gown, sleeves full of storm warnings. She whispered, "If you need to come in, voice soft enough that the wood might carry it." Movement answered. The bolt shivered, but she did not guide it. The door eased wider on its own permission, revealing a sliver of porch and the dark lawn beyond. No silhouette appeared. Still, the rice at her feet parted, two grains curling apart like parentheses welcoming a word. Mara did not step back. She loosened her grip on the bolt, leaving it free. Somewhere behind, the refrigerator hummed louder, the wallpaper clock ticked. A skipped beat, and unseen small shoes pattered once across linoleum before fading. In that hush, she understood a choice had crossed the threshold long before any figure would. Outside, wind lifted a wisp of her hair into the doorway's draft, then laid it flat, tender as a lullaby made of dry grains of rice, every photograph. Is a door disguised as memory? Mara found the envelope leaning against the inside of the unlocked front door, as though it had slipped through and grown tired of waiting. No stamp, no name, only the faint perfume of lake reeds and the damp breath of autumn. She carried it to the dining table where a single bulb hummed like a lone cricket, too stubborn to quit. Outside, wind combed the hedge. Inside, rice grains glimmered in carpet dusk, still mapping yesterday's riddle. She broke the seal. A Polaroid drifted out, light as a moth wing. It landed face up on the walnut wood, colors already bruising toward sepia. Father, mother, toddler son by a lakeshore. Her lungs stalled. Daniel, unshaven but grinning, knelt with his arm around 2-year-old Jonas, who clutched a yellow plastic boat as if it were the whole future's down payment. Mara stood behind them, one hand resting on Daniel's shoulder. Body language she now read as truce rather than affection, but the right edge of the snapshot was torn, sheared off with impatient fingers. Someone's arm, someone's face, excised. The tear's contour resembled coastline, abrupt and hungry. It felt intimate, surgical, the kind of mutilation performed by the person who owned the heartbeat in the picture. Lake water in the image. Glittered silver, a mirror still deciding what to reveal. Even flattened by chemistry, it seemed capable of swallowing everything reflected upon it. She traced the shoreline line with a thumb. Emulsion crackled softly, like ice admitting the first footstep. Instinct flipped the photograph. 4 words on the back, in Jonas's cramped capitals. Meet me where it ends, below. A set of faint numbers, nearly dissolved into the paper grain. She angled the card under the bulb until they surfaced latitude and longitude written in ink that looked diluted by tears or rain. 47.8261 N. 122.3914 W. Coordinates. The lake had a name now, spoken in the language of cartographers and satellites. Her pulse quickened, mapping its own meridian. She fetched Daniel's old field compass from the desk drawer, scratched brass, needle still decisive, and watched it spin north before steadying. The house, the rice grains, the stuffed wolf, all suddenly pawns on a globe turning toward confrontation. She returned to the table, sat, and let the Polaroid guide her gaze again. Details surfaced like minnows, Daniel's wedding band glinting despite the shadow of a storm cloud. The hem of her gardenia dress brushing damp grass. Jonas's shoelace untied, he'd tripped moments later, giggled, left a grass stain she never quite removed. The torn void at the edge vibrated with absence. Who had stood barely outside the surviving frame? Perhaps her mother, holding the locket camera's twin. Or perhaps Mara herself in another posture, arms crossed, second-guessing everything. But the tear was too deliberate to be accident. It felt more like confession. A floorboard creaked house. Settling, or memory entering. She smelled charcoal and cheap bourbon, conjuring Daniel's campfire attempts the afternoon this picture must have been taken. He'd teased, "Here, let the lake see its own smoke," as flames stuttered against damp logs. Jonas chased dragonflies. Mara counted them instead of arguments. She lifted the Polaroid to her lips, tempted to kiss Jonas's cropped curls, but stopped. Instead, she placed it atop yesterday's gray envelope and the stained fabric square, now freed from the sketchbook. Relics assembling themselves, conspiratorial. Flashback slid in, not as image but sensation. The weight of Daniel's arm the moment after the shutter clicked heavy, possessive, smelling of sun-warmed flannel. He whispered something she can't quite retrieve, but the emotional residue was clear, a promise already fraying. Later that day, thunder prowled and Daniel took Jonas out on the rental dock, lighter flicking against breeze, bragging that men teach tides lessons. Mara had stayed behind, folding picnic cloth into perfect squares, as if geometry could anchor unease. Back in present, the bulb flickered, briefly dimming the entire room. In that half-second of near darkness, she thought she saw water ripple. Across the table surface, the photo's lake escaping its borders. Light returned. Only her teacup trembled. She set the compass near the snapshot. The needle twitched as though sniffing magnetic residue embedded in the Polaroid's chemistry. Silly, she knew, but the coincidence tightened her throat. She took the locket from her neck, clicked it open. The tiny portrait of baby Jonas watched her with unfocused devotion. Behind the mini-frame lay a folded scrap of hotel receipt, hidden years ago. Evidence of Daniel's final night ashore before the ferry, a line item for double whiskey. She hadn't looked since the funeral. Now she slipped it out, slid it under the photo's torn edge, aligning past debts with current coordinates. The living room clock chimed 9, mournful. She glanced toward the hall. The front door stood ajar where she'd left it. Darkness pooled like ink in its mouth. Wind passed through the gap, worrying the rice. A grain skittered onto the dining room threshold, obeyed by another, as if the house itself plotted paths. Mara folded the Polaroid thirds in, hiding faces, exposing only water and the blank slice of torn edge. She pocketed it with the compass and the receipt, then shrugged into her coat. The fabric still smelled of rain and fear, but she buttoned it like armor. She flicked off the dining light. House shadows massed, murmuring unsolved equations. At the doorway she paused, hand on knob. Her scar prickled, forecasting storm. She wondered whether Jonas would truly be at those coordinates or merely wanted her to stand where history broke and decide who deserved rescue. Outside, street lamps burned sodium halos into low clouds, painting the asphalt the color of bruised lily. Mara descended the porch steps, rice dusting her solace. She looked back once. Inside, the hall candle she'd forgotten to snuff guttered, its flame bending as though peering at the place she'd been. She didn't lock the door. Some stories require a path for return or for pursuit. She walked too. The car, engine coughing awake like an aging dog, wipers squeaking protest over windshield dew. She set the compass on the dash. Its needle kissed north by northwest toward water. As the car rolled downhill, telephone wires paralleled her, taut, lines humming gossip. She touched the Polaroid in her pocket. The edges felt sharper, as though the tear kept widening. At the red light by the river, she unfolded it once more. Street lamp glare glided over the surface, turning lake silver to mercury. She pressed a fingertip along the torn flank until it met ink, the coordinates, smaller than breath, fading each second. She memorized them because photos can drown too. The radio crackled into life news of a storm advisory for the coastal inlet. She switched it off. Thunder-like schedules, Jonas did not. She drove on, remembering the smell of wet cedar along the trail down to that lake, remembering Daniel whistling off-key, remembering toddler laughter colliding with distant gull cries, remembering how quickly small arms tire when lifted to see farther. 30 minutes out, fir trees serrated the road's edge. Headlights carved fleeting grottos between trunks. Mara's heartbeat synchronized with the compass jitter on rough asphalt. She rolled down the window. Cold air hauled in the promise of brine. A sign appeared, park closed after dusk, but she steered past the chain gate, tires crunching gravel. She stopped where the path to the water began. The night smelled of damp pine needles and engine heat. She listened, only distant. Buoy bells, marking depths. She killed the lights. Darkness swallowed shapes, leaving only outlines made of sound wind fingering reed grass, her own breath condensing, a hush too deliberate to be emptiness. Clutching the torn photo like a passkey, she stepped onto the path. Gravel shifted under. Boots, a familiar crackle, the same note Rice made on the carpet. Moonlight, reluctant, showed glimpses of lake between branches, surface molten lead. She reached the shore. The dock where Daniel last stood leaned slightly left, arthritis of timber. A single lantern hung unlit at its throat. She smelled stale butane, the lighter. No memory's prank. Yet the scent led her forward. Halfway along the dock, boards flexed under weight, not hers. She halted. Ahead, in silhouette, someone kneeled near the lantern, broad-shouldered, motionless, as though carved from shadow. Not Jonas's slim frame. Another figure? Mara's breath snagged. The Polaroid twitched in her grip, as if the photo felt proximity to its missing piece. She took one step. The silhouette dissolved, separating into two smaller shapes. Coat draped over a crate. Empty. She reached the crate. Atop sat a thermos, steam curling through moonbeam fresh. Beside it lay a scrap of photo paper, edges torn to complement hers. She placed her fragment adjacent. Together, they formed a complete shoreline, and in the background, an older woman stood, her mother smiling tight, holding the locket camera. Coordinates on the new scrap gleamed bolder, rewritten. And beneath them, in Jonas's newer hand, one more truth underwater. Lake murmured against pilings, decoding silence. Mara's reflection blurred in the black pane, shoulders splitting into mother and daughter, both waiting. A ripple erased them, leaving only water, silver, ready to drown. Secrets or deliver them. She closed her eyes. The dock groaned as if accepting weight just arrived. When she opened them, thermos lid bobbed in the water, drifting toward the coordinates etched inside her skull. Map printed on liquid mirror. Walls remember the photographs they once wore. Mara paused at the dark mouth of the upstairs hallway. Suitcase still in the car. Coat smelling of lake vapor and verdicts not yet spoken. Ahead, a procession of picture frames receded into gloom, gilt edges catching the low lamplight like dull coins at the bottom of a fountain. Her feet hesitated on the first floorboard. It answered with a groan, announcing her the way guilt announces itself. Too loud, too late. She stepped forward. The first frame's glass lay spider-webbed, shards missing as though grief had plucked pieces for keepsakes. Inside, only a rectangle of lighter wallpaper where the photograph used to guard memory. Dust outlined silhouettes. Jonas's toddler. Curls, Daniel's shoulder, Mara's own hand lifted in mid-wave ghosts, inked in absence. She felt heat behind her eyes, but the tear ducts obeyed years of practice and stayed locked. Another step. Another frame, a Christmas portrait, or it had been. Glitter still clung to one corner, a flake of tinsel trapped in the splintered bevel. Empty now, it looked like a mouth mid-scream, jaw frozen wide by the shattering of glass. Mara's pulse matched the echo. Flashback slid under the door of remembrance. Christmas morning 8 years prior, the scent of cinnamon rolls mingling with cold legal ink. Jonas unwrapping toy dinosaurs by the tree when the bell rang. Outside, a courier in red mittens handed her an envelope so thick it looked gift-wrapped in dread. Kent petition for dissolution. Daniel had served her while Carollers still roamed the street. She remembered their voices drifting through the open doorway, merging with paper rip, forming a hymn no church would claim. Back in the hallway, she brushed a fingertip over the beveled edge. Static sparked, tiny sting-proof. That even vacancy could bite. She moved on. Frame after frame marched, ranks of hunger. Photographs missing, but their titles remained penciled on the backs. Ferry Day. First lost tooth. Anniversary number 7. She read them the way one reads headstones. Slow enough to feel the surrender. Halfway down, shards littered the runner. Rug, catching lamplight like scattered rice. She crouched, collecting a fragment pinched between nails. Her reflection fractured, one eye, half a mouth. She placed the sliver back where she found it. Mosaics of damage should not be rearranged without consent. Floorboards creaked under different weight, the echo of small shoes darting behind her. She straightened, heart angled toward her throat. Silence returned. Too sudden. She inhaled cedar. Dust. Exhaled the name she did not brave to say aloud. Jonas? Only the walls answered. Their paint contracting in night chill. At the corridor's midpoint hung the largest frame. A wedding enlargement once vibrant with gardenias in trembling July sky. Now the glass had exploded entirely. The gilded edge sagged, one corner dangling from a single nail like a dislocated limb. The wallpaper behind bore a darker rectangle, and within it, faint outline of her young face, shadow of the life she had curated. Then censored. She remembered Daniel drinking champagne straight from the bottle, while guests blew bubbles, rice raining like fragile meteors. She had laughed. How loud that sound now rings hollow in memory's cathedral. The frame, empty, tracked her as she passed, the way abandoned dogs track footfalls. The hallway narrowed, ceiling pressing lower, or perhaps posture folding her smaller. She noticed faint writing scrawled in dust on one pane of shattered glass. Listen. Under the next, count. Under the next, trust. Orders lined up like soldiers who forgot which war they fought. The handwriting, thin, angular, belonged to Jonas. She touched the third command. Dust smeared, leaving a bruise on her fingertip. Court papers again invaded thought. The sheriff's second visit weeks later. This time with a motion for emergency custody. Ribbons from discarded Christmas gifts still littered the living room floor, bright vorms among debris. Jonas had gathered the ribbons, tied them into a chain, wore it as armor while she signed away weekends and holidays. Each knot whispered. Future silences. A soft vibration quivered through floor joists. She stilled. It grew into a distant ring, old-fashioned telephone bell, metallic, obstinate. Daniel's study. He had insisted on the rotary set, claiming nostalgia sounds better than progress. After his death, she left the line disconnected. Yet the bell rang now, like a heart restarted in a corpse, but still a corridor remained between her and that door. She pressed on. Glass crunched under heel, crisp as breaking promise. Small triangles slid, revealing deeper carpet underneath, color, richer where sunlight had not bleached grief. She imagined these fragments as calendar pages, every crunch. Another month lost. At the last frame she halted. No shatter, no dust figure. Instead, the backing had been peeled away, exposing dry plaster cratered by time. Against that raw wall hung a single object, the coral lipstick, cap dented, suspended by a crimson ribbon looped over the nail. She reached, lifted it. On the wall behind, a message in that same thin hand. Turn around. She pivoted. The frames behind her no longer resembled mouths. They seemed windows, and each pane of broken glass now shimmered faintly, as if moonlight stood behind them, though no window in this hallway faced outdoors. Within one, she caught reflection not her own. A teenage boy walking away, shoulders squared, lighter flicking in his palm. She blinked. Only mottled wallpaper. The phone rang again, 3 pulses, then paused like a code pleading decoding. She pocketed the lipstick, pulse accelerating until ribs felt unzipped. Down the stairs she moved, guided by the bell. The study. Door stood ajar, exhaling dust of old ledgers, seaweed parkas, and Daniel's cologne long gone rancid. Inside, the rotary phone glowed foreign green on the mahogany desk, cord severed years ago, yet twisting now like a living vein. It rang once more, handset bobbing with each vibration. Wallpaper reflected in the varnish. She saw herself approach, a silhouette made of torn negatives. Asterisk, she did not lift the receiver. Instead, she noted the caller ID box someone had wired between. Cord stub's tiny screen blinking an unknown number, but beneath it, a second line of text, frame 0, 0 before counting starts. Her gaze darted to the bookshelf where a lone silver frame faced backward. She removed it, heart jackhammering. No glass in it, only a folded court document visible through empty front. She slid it out. Christmas date, Daniel's signature. In confident blue, her own shaky black. Across the top, stamped in red by some clerk's festive humor, Merry Petition. The phone's ring became a whine, as if urgency sharpened with each ignored answer. She set the decree down, placed the lipstick atop it like a seal. Then she wrapped fingers around the phone, feeling vibration like a captured bird. She hesitated, ear buzzing with frames screaming unsaid truths. She lifted the handset. Before she could speak, the ringing stopped, replaced by the soft hiss of distant tide meeting shore, a sound that had followed Daniel into death and Jonas, into exile. Then a voice, genderless, thin as wind through broken panes, whispered one number. One line clicked dead. The hiss remained, lessening until only her breath answered. In the hush, she pictured the hallway again, frames waiting, mouths poised to add syllables. One was spoken. How many to go? She placed the receiver down. Somewhere upstairs, glass settled with a final tick, punctuation to the phone's cryptic. Sentenced outside the study window, a branch tapped, counting itself against the glass. 1, 1. Print of her fingertip remained smeared on the dusty decree, coral lipstick glowing like a covert beacon. The silence thickened, preparing to speak a second numeral, and the phone began to ring again. Night peeled the world down to neon and regret. Mara stood at the farthest window of the intensive care corridor, forehead grazing glass cooled by midnight. The pane borrowed light from the parking lot sodium lamps, bleaching her reflection until only bones remained, a white silhouette stitched to the darkness beyond. Somewhere inside that dark, her son lay submerged in sedatives and algorithms. But the doors to his room stayed shut like clasped hands refusing to pray. An orderly pushed a mop past her shoes, leaving the scent of ammonia and indifferent mercy. Overhead, bulbs hummed fatigued hymns. Their glow limped down paint weeping old beige. She watched the lights as sailors once watched northern stars. But these constellations offered no direction, only wattage. 3 days since Jonas arrived. Unconscious, hauled from lake water that mirrored the sky too faithfully to forgive mistakes. 3 days of doctors speaking fluent decimal. Intracranial pressure 13. Oxygen saturation 92. Odds 50. Mara heard only wind. Each statistic collided with the window, turning to frost patterns she could not decipher. She pressed the locket at her throat until its hinge hurt. It still carried Jonas's baby picture, cheeks full, eyes fearless before vocabulary learned caution. The metal felt colder than the glass, colder than moon around swallowed words. A pair of physicians approached, shoes whispering across linoleum. Their conversation floated in measured cadences. Vent weaning, neurostorming. Possible extubation if... She closed her eyes, hearing instead the wind at patrolled hospital eaves, asking why in a pitch older than. Grief. Key rings jingled on a security guard's belt, sounds slicing memory open. Flashback. Last Tuesday, rain thrashing porch rails, her own key set arcing across the living room like thrown shrapnel. Jonas's voice, a storm of accusations. You kept the truth underwater. She answered with silence sharpened by survival. The key struck the wall, left a dent shaped like a harbored secret. He slammed out, tires skidding through rice-flecked driveway puddles. By dawn, police reported a crash, then the lake, then the coma. The elevator dinged. A gurney emerged bearing flowers for some other fighter. Their perfume bruised the sterile air, reminding her of Gardenia's on a July gown. She tasted hospital, coffee acid on her tongue, and turned back to the glass. Beyond it, the night parking lot glittered with frost-tiny shards, mirroring the hallway of shattered frames back home. Snow curled in the wind like torn photographs deciding where to land. Inside Jonas's ICU bay, monitors painted his skin electron blue. She counted 8 tubes, each a sentence he could not finish. Shame slid under her ribs, pooling where breath should rest. She knocked gently on the glass 3 taps, the lullaby cadence she once used when dragons in his closet roared. No nurse. Glanced up. Machines answered with precise sighs. The recorder arrived without ceremony. A nurse she had not seen before, a woman whose badge read Adelaide, touched Mara's elbow, eyes harbor gray. From her uniform pocket she produced a small digital device, black, scuffed at the corners, a strip of masking tape across its back. Play when ready, nothing else. Adelaide squeezed Mara's hand once, a pulse of warmth amid climate-controlled chill, then vanished toward the medication room, solace silent. Recorder in palm, Mara felt its humble gravity, the heft of something dying to speak. She turned it over. Battery indicator glowed steady green. Someone expected endurance. She lifted her gaze to Jonas again. The faint rise and fall of ventilated chest looked artificial, movement borrowed. In the reflection, the recorder occupied her heart like a dark second locket. She wondered what confession nested inside. Sonar from the dock? Courtroom instructions? One more numeral of the hallway phone? Fear-mothered possibilities. An alarm blipped 2 doors down. Staff converged. A brief ballet of purposeful chaos. Alone, Mara raised the recorder near her ear, but didn't press play. The label's phrasing unnerved her. Ready for what? Forgiveness or conflagration? She slid the device into her coat pocket beside the coral lipstick. Plastic scraped metal. The sound reminded her of torn film spooling. She paced the corridor. Each step echoed in the high atrium, meeting the drip of 4 pumps and distant vending machine coughs. Overhead, television's muted late-night news, captions staggering across tragedy she could not absorb. Her shoes left half-moons of condensation. On tile like pale commas punctuating run-on worry, a janitor slowed his cart, nodding. "You okay, ma'am?" The kindness almost split her. She nodded back, words wrapped in fog. She stopped by the staff bulletin board. Notices fluttered, CPR. Refresher, Grief Counseling Group Tuesdays, Anonymous Ethics Hotline. One index card pinned crooked bore a child's crayon drawing stick figure in bed. Rainbow overhead caption, "Get well, Dad." The innocence threatened to unseat her composure, so she returned to the window. From this angle she could see the curve of Jonas's forehead, the bandage at his temple where doctors drilled to relieve pressure. She traced that curve on the glass. Her reflection overlapped, positioning her silhouette as guardian veil. The overhead vent exhaled. Her hair lifted, settling like unresolved verdict. She conjured the last words she spoke to him before the crash. "Come back inside. We can finish this without thunder." He'd answered, "Storm's already in here, Mom." Now the storm pulsed inside wires and drips, inside the recorder, inside Marrow. She drew the lipstick, uncapped it, wrote on the window in hurried choral. "I am here." Letters glowed garish against sterile backdrop, defiant graffiti. Condensation haloed each stroke. Then she clicked the cap, sealing color and vow. The wind stepped up outside, slapping tree limbs against the building. Snow particles waltzed under lamps, white noise incarnate. Mara's scarred index finger throbbed. Weather remembered. She finally pressed the recorder's play button. Static, like radio between stations, swelled then settled into lapping water. A boy's voice, Jonas, unmistakably younger, whispered, "Mom, if you're hearing this, I found the rest of the map. Footsteps on dock planks. I know who took the missing frame and why Dad never burned the lighter. I'm going to get proof. If I don't make it." A pause, breath ragged, as if wind stole half his sentence. "Don't look for fault in mirrors. Look in windows." Splash, distant. Click, end of track. The corridor narrowed around her. She rewound, listening again, parsing each syllable for latitude of blame. Map? Missing frame? Proof. Her mind sprinted down hallways cluttered with relics. The rice, the stain, the phone calls counting forward. She saw a constellation aligning, a ledger shifting weight. Footfalls approached. A doctor in teal scrubs carrying the clipboard. "Mrs. Kent, his vitals are stabilizing. We may lighten sedation at 6. The words felt like delicate furniture placed in a burning room. She thanked him. He moved on, decimals trailing. She faced. The lipstick message. Moisture blurred its middle. Through coral letters she watched Jonas float in drugged twilight. "Look in windows," his recording urged. She looked and met her own eyes superimposed upon her son's still face. There. Reflections fused, mother and child sharing one uncertain outline. Ready or not, a lone snowflake clung to the exterior pane, slowly dissolving under indoor heat, leaving a teardrop streak. She lifted fingertip to meet it, skin and meltwater separated by engineered crystal. On contact, the window's alarm chirped sensors. Unhappy with temperature change, then quieted, as if granting them this touch. Down the corridor, a clock ticked to 12:01, official tomorrow. She tucked the recorder back into her pocket. Its weight had changed, not heavier, just more definite, like a key realizing it belongs in a specific lock. She whispered through the glass, "Jonas, when they wake you, remember the map." Her breath fogged the message further, turning letters into coral smudge, transforming statement into tender ambiguity. Footsteps of Adelaide returned. She offered a paper cup of water. "He squeezed my hand during suctioning," the nurse said. Very slight, but real. Mara's chest flared with heat, first ember of impossible dawn. She clutched the cup, cool between palms. "Play it again." "Later," Adelaide murmured, tapping Mara's coat pocket, closer to him. Then she disappeared into fluorescent distance, badge glinting like a minor star. Mara drank, swallowed wind and doubt. She pulled a chair to the window, sat, recorder ready. Lipstick message dimming into hieroglyph. Snow on the other side thickened, coating the pain until the world outside surrendered shape, leaving only her watch point and the faint beep inside. Jonas's room charting seconds. She would wait for 6 o'clock and every second after. If storms needed witnesses, she could be. Balcony, barometer, archive. Bone-white reflections stared back, but inside that pallor lived motion. A pulse sinking to the monitor's green upticks. Somewhere deep in the hospital ducts, wind rephrased its why into a hushed when. Mara closed her eyes, rehearsing answers. The snowflake trail outside melted downward, thinning into a single, unwavering line-like tape threading toward a reel poised to record the rest. Some vows are promises. Others are evidence waiting for daylight. The hallway chair surrendered beneath Mara as sleep ambushed her in increments. First the eyelids sagging, then the neck tilting until her chin brushed the locket. Beyond the glass panel, Jonas's ventilator cycled, steady as an oath repeated by someone too weak to mean it. She tried to keep vigil. Exhaustion kept jury hours. When the dream opened, she stood alone at the center of a courtroom made of lake. Water frozen mid-wave. Benches were rows of empty frames, their gilt corners sharpened into question marks. High above, fluorescent tubes flickered, neon hummingbird wings that painted her skin a morgue hue. The judge's bench hovered where ceiling should be, carved from driftwood, barnacles clinging like punctuation. A voice boomed, not from any throat, but from the recorder she clutched, its red light blinking cross-examination. "Case number 0, it declared, the People v. the Mother of Storms. Echoes ricocheted across the aquatic walls and came back thinner, like children after illness. Mara's shoes sank a fraction. The floor puddled with memory. First witness, Daniels. Laugh, disembodied, sauntered into the witness box carrying the scent of cheap bourbon and lighter fuel. "She knew," the laugh testified, words crackling like burning lace. "She saw me drift and still called it tide." It flicked invisible ash toward her, and the watery floor hissed. Second witness. Silence. Mara recognized it, the exact hush. That followed every slammed door. Dense as wool, perched now on the stand wearing her wedding dress. Silence said nothing, of course, but the jury of empty frames nodded, understanding fluid in the unsaid. Third witness. A child's scream. Jonas at 11, the pitch that split air when the Ferry horn drowned Daniel. The scream spoke through. Oscillating monitors, reading vitals as charges. Heart rate 140. Guilt uncontained. Oxygen truth at 62. Mara's knees threatened to negotiate surrender. She wanted to object, yet found her mouth sewn by coral wax. The lipstick had sealed closing arguments before they began. A fourth figure emerged from side curtains. The unnamed woman from Daniel's ledger, perfume of hotel soap and secrecy. Her face blurred, as if privacy clauses had been smeared across her features. She held up the torn photograph edge, the part that had erased her, and addressed the court without opening her lips. Absence is authored by those who benefit from it. She offered the fragment to Mara, who couldn't lift her hands. Cuffs of wet rice had solidified around her wrists. Flashback footage projected itself on the watery walls. Christmas courier, courtroom ribbons, rice cracking underfoot, keys spinning midair. Each image paused just before impact, hanging like verdicts unsent. She realized the prosecution was chronology itself, indicting her for mishandling sequence editing history to protect. Then calling protection betrayal. The gavel rose from her chest. She felt it form behind sternum, a wooden mallet sculpted from every unspoken apology. With each heartbeat, it lifted higher, ribs springing apart as if courtroom demanded structural evidence. Pain bloomed rose hip and rust, yet she was almost grateful. Proof she was still corporeal somewhere. From a side door swung the locket, enlarged to the height of a man, ticking open and shut like a metronome. Inside its twin portraits rotated, baby Jonas smiling and present Jonas drowned in ventilator blue. The mechanism asked, choose which hour to save. She tried to step forward. The lake ice floor cracked spider veins, sending cold up calves. Defense counsel never arrived. Instead, the stuffed wolf from Jonas's dresser trotted in, one glass. Eye cloudy, the other a perfect mirror. It sat at her feet and lifted its muzzle as if to howl. No sound emerged, only exhalation of cedar dust that formed words in the thin courtroom air. Truth isn't lethal, secrecy is. Then the dust drifted into the jury, frosting their empty panes. Promise me you'll finish the story above the surface. Static swallowed the tape, but spat one last whisper, quieter than breath in a church. And forgive the water, it only reflected us. The recording clicked, but the courtroom's PA system replayed the sentence in looping echo, until even Mara's marrow mouthed it, her lips unsealed. She tried to say yes, yet only vapor emerged, words distilled to condensation on invisible glass. In that absence, the nameless woman pressed the torn photo edge against Mara's chest. Paper fused into cloth, branding her bodice with evidence. Rice grains at her feet rearranged, spelling a time 213, a deadline, or a birthmark. The wolf rose, rough bristling, and the cedar dust reformed into a staircase leading upward. But the bailiff faceless in Adelaide's scrubs blocked it. Palm out. Verdict first, she intoned, voice multiphasic like overlapping radio channels. Mara's heart gavel climbed again, ready to pronounce. When the lightning hammer crashed, she looked at the empty frames, the jury, and realized each now contained a photograph of her. Different ages, each with eyes closed. They waited for her to open them. The judge's bench creaked, barnacles flaking. A hammer of lightning formed the gavel in spectral hand and descended toward the sound block that was her heart. She felt the instant of contact, bone striking bone. The internal courtroom silencing in white flash. She gasped awake. Neon ceiling panels buzzed. Her neck ached from the chair, mouth tasted of copper and unslept hours. The recorder lay on her Lap, red light off. She focused on the IQ window, bracing for the familiar rise and fall of sheets. The bed was empty. Wires coiled like shed skins. Monitor lines flat. Pillows evacuated. For a second she believed the trial had executed its sentence. Then she noticed the ventilator still on, cycling for no one, and a single rice grain on the mattress, bright against hospital white. Mara stood too fast. Blood-rehearsed blackout. Behind her eyes. Through the open doorway of the bay she heard a distant slow beep, maybe from another room or another world. She stepped inside, fingers grazing the rice, pocket retrieving the recorder as if it could subpoena reality. On the pillow a note, 4 numerals written in her coral lipstick. 2:13. No AM or PM, no ward or floor. Just the next count, she pressed. The grain into her palm sharp, insistent. The gavel inside her chest echoed like a railroad spike driven deeper, urging pursuit. Somewhere down the corridor rubber soles squeaked like small shoes running where no one walks. Overhead, vents sighed clauses of unfinished oaths. She would follow, but first she tucked the grain into her locket, letting it rest beside the infant portrait like a seed needing dark to remember how to sprout. The clasp clicked shut, a pocket. Verdict. Heart hammering. She crossed the threshold, leaving the empty bed to its machines. Behind her, the ventilator exhaled one more breath, as though releasing custody. Ahead, lights flickered in sequence, a runway for reckoning. The gavel in her chest struck once more. Not verdict but summons, echoing into the untouched minutes. Ahead, some gates sing because grief still needs a lullaby. Mara guided the borrowed sedan along a one-lane road that wove uphill like thread, pulled tight through mourning cloth. Fog smudged the world beyond the headlights, leaving only moss-cloaked stones and the flash of deer eyes retreating into fur shadows. Her compass lay on the passenger seat, needle quivering north-northwest toward the digits. Jonas had whispered while drifting back into consciousness, coordinates spoken like an apology he had no strength to finish. She touched the locket. At her throat. Inside rattled 2 rice grains, one from the bedroom carpet, one from Gabriel's small hand in the ICU waiting room only hours ago. They clicked like dice too scared to land. The cemetery gate emerged, wrought iron blackened by decades of salt wind. Bars curved into fleur-de-lis, but weather had tuned them into tuning forks. Every gust coaxed a 4-note hymn, half promise, half dirge. She pushed and the gate answered with a minor fifth, the interval priests used before candles gutter. Beyond, rows of markers glimmered under a thin moon, damp marble reflecting like shy mirrors. The air smelled of wet cedar and turned earth a perfume of endings. Asterisk gravel shifted beneath her boots, each crunch an echo of shattered picture glass back home. She passed epitaphs etched in identical fonts, catalog numbers of loss, until a rectangle of new soil halted her. Granite, still ash gray, bore 2 names already gilded, Daniel Matthew Kent and, below it, Amelia Halley Kent, her own birth dates flanking a dash that waited for final arithmetic. Beneath the duet yawned a 3rd blank line, shallowly scored. Like a breath withheld. Dew pooled in the grooves where future letters would anchor. Mara traced the damp and felt her pulse bleed into stone. Footsteps approached from the far side of the plot measured, leaf soft. Fog thinned enough to reveal. A woman in a charcoal coat, curls pinned in loose discipline. Mara's lungs stuttered. She recognized the missing edge of the lake photograph. This was the silhouette torn away. The woman carried a toddler, blanket mustard gold against the gray. Child and woman both stopped an arm's reach away, sharing the same hazel steadiness that once made Daniel's compliments stammer. "I'm Lena," the woman said, voice low, wind-tuned. "We never properly met." Mara managed a nod. Questions assembled behind her teeth, but lined up out of order, afraid to parade. Lena angled the child forward. "Gabriel," she murmured, and the boy peeked, curls matted by mist. his eyes wide. And storm-colored pulled at Mara like tide. Wind pierced the bars again. The gate sang a chord that vibrated through shoe solace. Lena inhaled with that music, then extended her free hand. In her palm lay the brass lighter Daniel's, initials buffed away, yet shape unmistakable. Its metal glowed faint, as if storing pocketed sunsets. "Jonas asked me to bring this," she said. "He said it belongs to the only person who can close it." Mara accepted the lighter. The scar on her index finger prickled familiar heat. She thumbed the lid. Flame rose, tiny and defiant in damp air. The reflection danced across Daniel's carved name, but refused to settle on hers. She quenched the flame and slipped the lighter into the locket chain, letting cool brass press against ribs. "He also asked me to show you this," Lena added, producing a folded notarized page. Mara unfolded it under moonlight, an addendum. To Daniel's will, signed 2 weeks before the ferry accident, naming Jonas sole executor and acknowledging one Gabriel Hawley Kent as beneficiary. "Daniel never told me," Mara whispered, though whether she spoke to Lena, the stone, or the gate she couldn't tell. "He told no one," Lena answered. Regret was a language he spoke privately. She adjusted Gabriel on her hip. The boy clutched something between thumb and forefinger, a rice grain, impossibly white against night. He reached toward Mara, offering it. She opened her palm and received the grain. Dew instantly beaded on its surface like a newborn secret. Memory rewound. Jonas counting cracks to calm storms. Grain trails mapping guilt, rice snapping under hospital. Solace, now another grain completed the cord. She slipped it into the locket. 3 pieces of a wedding day rain finally reunited. Wind dropped. The sudden hush felt deliberate. A conductor's baton arrested midair. Lena's gaze flicked to the blank third line on the stone. "Jonas asked me one more favor," she said. "To bring you here at dawn this Saturday. Said you'd understand which name belongs last." Mara's throat constricted. If this plot held Daniel's absolution and reserved hers, the remaining line was not for Jonas. He was out there healing, rewriting inheritance with every breath. The line waited to bear the cost of silence itself. "Maybe no name," she murmured. "Maybe the space stays open so the earth can breathe through it." Gabriel squirmed free of Lena's arms and toddled through damp grass until tiny boots met the fresh mound. He patted soil as if smoothing a blanket over sleeping giants, then turned to Mara. Moonlight kissed his curls. Dew adorned them like crown jewels never stolen. Mara crouched to meet his height. She inhaled scents of loam and unfamiliar shampoo. Gabriel studied her locket, small brow furrowed. He tapped it once. The universal curiosity key dot. She opened the pendant. 2 rice grains glimmered alongside infant Jonas's portrait. She added, "Gabriel's offering," 3 forming a tiny constellation. Without thinking, she guided the boy's fingertip to the grains. "These are stories," she told him, voice more breeze than language. "They remind us to grow roots before storms." Behind them, the gate resumed its hymn, softer now, as if satisfied some note had found resolution. Lena stepped closer, tearshine flickering but not spilling. "He's heard about you," she said. Jonas talked while drifting in and out said. His mother carried galaxies inside whispers. Mara exhaled a laugh that trembled like old glass. "Galaxies leak." "All light does," Lena replied. Gabriel tugged Mara's sleeve, earnestness outweighing vocabulary. His mouth opened, sound hesitant, then certain. "Gemma." 1 word half bud, half bloom. The syllables landed like warm rain on stone. Soaking cracks she hadn't noticed. For a beat no one breathed. Then the iron gate delivered a clear high note, the purest yet, ringing straight through marrow. Wind pushed fog apart, revealing sunrise bruising the eastern edge of sky. Thin orange. Bled into gray dot. Mara rose, knees damp, pulse surprisingly steady. She closed the locket, grains and portraits sealed with a click quiet as acceptance. Her hand found Gabriel's shoulder. The boy leaned into it, as if trusting genealogy by instinct. She addressed Lena, though eyes never left on. I don't know the vocabulary for what comes next. Neither do I, Lena admitted, but there's time to write it. She brushed soil from Gabriel's blanket. Jonas will be discharged today. He wants you both. Mara imagined hospital corridors filling with ordinary daylight. Jonas sitting upright telling a nurse about rice magic and lighter promises. She imagined bringing Gabriel to meet him, Lena at her side. The four of them an equation with too many variables but one shared sum, surviving the storm. She faced the headstone once more. Daniel's name glinted, but in the newborn light it looked less like accusation, more like a chapter heading. Her own engraved letters awaited conclusion, yet the blank line below seemed suddenly generous, a placeholder not for death, but for whatever they chose to plant. Perhaps a date of reconciliation, perhaps nothing at all. Empty space carried its own music. The wind stilled. Even the gate paused, iron lips parted. In that hush, Mara heard new sound, the subtle rush of Gabriel breathing, the whisper of Lena's coat, her own heartbeat sinking to both. She realized the hymn was no longer outside. It had migrated inward into ligament and scar, carrying melody wherever she walked. She extended her free hand to Lena. Together, they stepped from the mound. Gravel greeted their exit like applause muted by gloves. Gabriel trotted ahead until the gate loomed. At his touch, the bars trembled, offering a final chord neither lament nor jubilation, but something suspended, a note that could resolve only by continuing. Mara followed, lighter beating warm against chest, locket weight reassuring, blank stone behind, open sky ahead. The gate coaxed its song one last time, escorting them onto the road, where fog lifted in shards and morning unfolded like a verdict they still had power to write. Behind them, the cemetery returned to quiet, but if one listened closely, iron still vibrated with the tiniest refrain, 3 rice grains colliding inside a silver shell, a child's new words circling air, and the echo of a gate that had learned to sing hope. Very wound had an hour it stopped being nightmare and started being weather. Mara entered the kitchen, the way a ghost returns to a favored room, soft-footed, unsure any chair would still remember her weight. The floorboards did, bowing with a sigh that felt more like greeting than protest. On the stove, a dented stockpot breathed steam beneath a single bulb. The clock above the sink read 3:17 a.m. Its digits the green of meadow grass she had not walked since the funeral. Jonas waited at the table, wrists resting on laminated oak, scarred by years of homework and arguments. Tape still webbed the inside of his elbow where ivivas had bloomed. Across from him, Lena cradled a ladle and hummed the lullaby Mara once used to lure fevers toward morning. The tune wobbled in a minor key, as though remembering its own mistakes. Between them, Gabriel, pajama-clad, beat a plastic spoon on an empty cereal bowl, each tap a vote of confidence in this thin hour. No one spoke, because the silence had finally become gentle. Words might bruise it. Mara slid into the third chair, Jonas's college sweatshirt hanging from her shoulders like borrowed resolve. Steam fogged her glasses. When she cleared them, the kitchen looked smaller, as if walls had inched closer to eavesdrop. Lena poured soup. The broth smelled of chicken bones, ginger, and something earthy perhaps, honesty at last reduced to flavor. Mara noticed how Lena's wrist trembled only after each bowl was safely filled, courage timing its collapse for after the pour. Gabriel squealed when his spoon met noodles. A strand clung to his chin like punctuation. Steam curled into shapes she recognized, one like the ferry whistle, another the sycamore limb that had spared the roof at cost to Jonas's bicycle. Shapes dissolved, but the memories they unlocked lingered. Daniel braving Christmas rain to leave gifts at a door he no longer owned, wrapping paper transparent with sorrow. Jonas on the stairs, clutching ribbon, ends the way some children clutch prayer beads. More memories queued, Lena and Daniel in a diner booth near the courthouse, their reflections overlapping in the window. Jonas outside counting bricks so he wouldn't overhear the conversation redrawing his family. Mara remembered hating the woman's laughter without knowing its owner. Now she saw exhaustion behind it, how survival sometimes borrows brightness. It can't afford. Resentment receded like tide, leaving room for a quieter current, slow but irrevocable. The way rivers change course when no one is looking. She lifted her spoon, heat branding her lip. Secrets had been siphoned like infection. What remained could be tasted without fear. Jonas cleared his throat. "Mom," he said, voice gravel after floodwater, the drawer. Her gaze followed his to the oak sideboard she had locked the afternoon. Daniel served papers, then forgot the key but remembered the shame. Jonas reached into his hoodie and produced a key filed thin at the teeth, found it taped under Dad's tackle box. Fingers shaking with anticipation, he rolled to the sideboard. The key slid in with a metallic side dash click. The drawer opened. On a smell of stale ink and lemon oil. Jonas lifted out manila envelopes, dust motes spinning like unsettled jurors, and set them beside Gabriel's bowl. The toddler paused drumming, sensing an older rhythm. Mara unfolded the first packet. Her own handwriting stared back. Proposed decree of dissolution, unsigned. Date, 10 Christmases ago. Beneath lay Daniel's draft apology, never sealed, stained. By a ring of whiskey glass. Mortgage insurance he'd meant to change. The ferry ticket ripped in half. Page after page, every sheet a swallowed argument. Moisture blurred her vision from inside. She stacked the documents in order, each thump a funeral drum for a former self. Lena's fingertips, light as confession, rested on Mara's wrist. "We can read them together," she offered, voice threaded with reluctance and bravery. Jonas spoke again. "There's one more." He pried at the drawer's false bottom. A velvet pouch, faded twilight purple, emerged. He spilled its contents. A gold ring set with an opal milky center bruised by bands of green and blue. Not Mara's plain wedding band. This stone shimmered like a secret lagoon. Lena gasped. "He promised that to me," she breathed, fingers hovering. Said he'd give it when things were settled. Mara's heart didn't race. It rearranged, like furniture choosing better posture. She rolled the ring beneath the bulb. Light dived into the gem, refracted, returned uncertain. Which color to stay? "It's beautiful," she said, and meant it. The hush thickened, broth scent deepening as if the air itself sipped. Gabriel gently pushed his empty bowl toward Mara. "More soup, Yama." The word fluttered the candle of her composure. She served him noodles, then steadied the ladle after its clang sounded too much like a closing door. Jonas nudged the ring toward her. "What should we do with it?" Mara pictured Daniel skipping stones while pocketing futures he never intended to spend, herself folding the Gardenia dress smaller and smaller until it fit her fist. Lena on courthouse steps, hidden by the camera's torn edge, waiting for a life that kept rescheduling. She slid the ring to the center, met Lena's eyes. He kept us orbiting him even after the water took him, undone circling. Relief griefs. Quiet twin shone in Lena's gaze. She turned the ring once, then twice, as though tuning it. "Then what is it now?" Mara guided Gabriel's thumb into the opal's hollow. The ring swallowed his first knuckle, wobbling loose. "A promise recycled," she said. "Let him grow into it." Gabriel beamed. A lighthouse flicked on. He lifted his hand, ring flashing, and squealed approval. The kitchen bulb flickered in sympathy or gratitude. Tension drained like broth from a finished bowl. Lena exhaled a laugh, short and ragged. Jonas leaned back, shoulders descending from years of vigilance. Silence changed key, not absence, but rest. Mara folded each document once more, slid them into their envelope. On the flap she wrote, "Archived." 3:17 a.m., then sealed it with a swipe of coral lipstick, the dented tube's last inch pressed flat. The envelope now resembled a time capsule left in plain sight. Wind rattled gutters, but found no purchase in this pocket of lamplight. The refrigerator clicked off, granting an extra decibel to hush. Mara turned the burner low. Soup would keep until dawn. Truth, once simmering, rarely spoiled. Lena handed her a mug of lemon water. Ceramic warmed Mara's palms with ordinary honesty. No one said goodnight. Minutes accreted, quiet as snow on a roof they trusted would hold. Jonas hummed the lullaby's tale, offering melody back to its first voice. Mara joined the last note, cracked but on pitch. The harmony lingered a heartbeat after throats closed. Gabriel yawned, ring glinting, and leaned against Mara's side. She drew the sweatshirt tighter around both of them, fabric smelling of cedar and far-off water evidence that storms recede, even if they leave their names on your shore. The clock ticked to 3:18 a.m., but none marked it. They were already living in another measure where time kept watch without keeping score. Steam thinned, bowls emptied, and the opal caught the bulb once more, scattering constellations across wood-grain new star maps for footsteps that, come. Sunrise would learn the house by laughter instead of grief. Somewhere unseen, 3 rice grains inside a locket nudged together, striking the sound too small for ears, yet large enough to promise morning. Wounds are safer folded into daylight. Then locked in the dark. Dawn draped the backyard in hesitant gold as Mara stepped from the back door, barefoot on dew-damp grass. The dress, ivory silk once folded into attic corners, hung limp on the clothesline, its torn hem drifting like a wounded wing. She stretched her fingers between herself and the fabric, letting the morning wind answer the question she hadn't voiced. Could this be healed? She fetched a spool of thread, a needle, and a small tin of pins from the kitchen drawer she'd left open all night, as though tempting fate to come clean. The tin was dented, stained with rust and echoes, Jonas's baby socks folded like premonitions, the ring she'd returned to Gabriel, and the lighter tag from Daniel's jacket. The drawer still smelled of cedar and old promises. At the line, she anchored the dress, smoothing it with palms that smelled of detergent and apology. The hem gaped in ragged tears, one jagged arc where she had cut out the bloodstain, one softer tear where grief had torn the threads. She bent to tend the raw edge, threading needle with quiet concentration. The midday breeze carried a distant train horn, a lullaby for departures. Her stitching was tentative at first, large, uneven stitches that bridged the wound with obvious tension. Each knot she tied pressed the fabric closer to whole, and with every pass of the needle, the dress breathed less like corpse and more like creature ready to stretch wings. She thought of how Jonas had learned to swim here, how Lena had pressed a handkerchief to a scraped knee, how Daniel had once tucked a ferry ticket into the pocket, still believing in safe departures. A spider in the corner of the line paused, midweave, as if the web held its own vigil. Mara flicked a pin into the grass, took a steadying breath, and narrowed her stitches smaller, closer, more deliberate. She hummed a lullaby as she sewed, the same melody she'd taught Jonas when fevers raged and doors slammed. Tonight, the refrain felt sacramental. Hush, little one, time learned to shelter, thread pulled taut. She brushed the silk smooth. No sign of tears remained, only a line of careful repair. The dress caught the sun and glowed in spite of its scars. Mara closed her eyes. In the room behind her, muted lights flicked. Lena checking on Gabriel. Jonas stirring outside I see you door. She pictured the hospital corridor, lit fluorescent white yesterday, listening to monitors beep, to Adelaide's calm voice, to Jonas whispering forgiveness despite missing hours. A sudden breeze coaxed the dress. It danced, weightless, moving like hope, tethered but willing. Pride, small as moss between stones, tickled her sternum. The dress had been torn by fire and blood. Now it bore threads of resurrection, She gathered the items from the tin, the ring, the lighter tag, the first divorce packet stamped archived, and a brass bank key Jonas had handed her this morning. He said nothing, just pressed it into her palm with his second smile of awakening. I remember, but I forgive. The key sat heavy in her hand teeth, worn by years of silence. Symbol of account waiting to be reclaimed. She walked toward the house, dress billowing like a promise behind her. At the door, she paused, inhaling the morning, then turned sideways and slid the bank key into a music box carved from cherry wood. Jonas's first birthday gift to her nearly 14 years ago. She closed the lid. The box chimed a single bell. Note clear as a verdict, quiet as consent. Inside, beneath velvet lining, the key nestled beside Gabriel's tiny ring, opal glinting like a sunrise heart in that wood womb. The lighter tag lay on top, a silver talisman. She shut the box and locked it, clicking lid sealed. A safe deposit inside her chest. She set the music box on the mantel where the locket rested, grains of rice dusting the bronze. Above, the repaired dress rippled in pre-dawn breeze, an heirloom of resilience, not ruin. Mara strode through the house, opening every window. Screens lifted, curtains billowed. Stale air exhaled in dusty plumes. Window after window, she let dawn claim its space: kitchen, living room, hallway. Jonas's bedroom where the corset waited, unstitched since confession. Light spilled in, dancing on floorboards, exposing footprints of recovery. She paused in the nursery doorway. Jonas's old crib was empty, but a cradle song hummed in memory. The room smelled of cedar and clean sheets. On the shelf sat the stuffed wolf, eye chipped but vigilant. The wolf watched her float the morning light across the walls. She stroked its fur, quiet tears carving channels she didn't bother to catch. Guilt had evaporated with windows open. Now only regret's residue remained, something manageable. Through the front window she glimpsed the clothesline dress, lighter now, wings mended. A single cloud passed, sunlight slanted through silk. The dress shifted again. Someone crossing the lawn would see at first sight of 12-something healed. Held open, she descended the front steps, bare feet on wood warmed by dawn. Kids on the street had begun morning routines. A distant lawnmower hummed life back into asphalt. She watched the repaired dress until it became background to the neighborhood's waking heartbeat. Back inside, she placed the music box on the hallway console beside the locket photograph of baby Jonas. The house smelled of breeze and broth and sun-cracked plaster. She pulled the locket open. 2 rice grains nestled near Jonas's grin. She added the third grain, the one Gabriel handed her this morning at the cemetery, grain of forgiveness, grain of shape-shifting legacy. The tiny constellation rested against warm metal. She closed it. The subtle click felt like the setting of a vow, not to Daniel, not to anyone who had betrayed, but to the generation she now steered. Lena and Gabriel and Jonas, all inheritors of this house and this healing. The dress, the box, the locket, all fragments sewn to promise. Mara slipped the locket beneath her sweater, fingers brushing the music box key beneath wood veneer. She stood a moment, listening to the house hum back at her, the creak of second-floor joists, the soft tick of a clock that survived every divorce petition and every lighter click. The dawn sun warmed her cheek like a benediction. She leaned into it, eyes closed, absorbing permission. The final window had opened. The dress, repaired, sashayed quiet across sky. The music box lay locked, its key safe. The son, awake and forgiving, awaited breakfast in his kitchen chair. Mara exhaled long enough to empty sorrow. She inhaled after, full of possibility, ready to step into the day, not as someone surviving storms, but as someone who learned to wind them into melody. Sunlight pooled at her feet. She took one step forward, and the day began carrying promise like a dress freshly mended.